Let's take a look at the evolution of English spelling and how it can affect students in general, not just in English-speaking countries, but everywhere in the world, since English is the international language of the modern world. To do this, let's not just look at English, let's take a wider look to include other languages. Well, English is different from most other European languages regarding spelling, because it is not consistent on how it represents sounds using the alphabet. To illustrate this, let's take a look at this word and let's try to pronounce it. Now, most of you may have pronounced it as read, but it could also be pronounced as read. So you don't know by just looking at this word how to pronounce it. So this letter combination can represent two sounds, read and read, or maybe read and read. We just don't know by looking at it. The only way to identify the sound is to know in what context the words were used. So here we say, I will read it tomorrow, because we can tell that this is in the future tense. So the verb read is in future tense. So we will be read. While here it's in past tense. So we would say, I read it yesterday. Now, as we will see, this is contrary to the basic principle of the alphabet. Let's take a look at other languages and see how they deal with these differences. Here we can see the word esta in Spanish, right? In this word, we can see the old Latin rule being followed, which is that if there are two syllables, if a word has two syllables, the first syllable is long and the second is short, or the first one is accented and the second is not. That's what long means. It means it's pronounced with more stress than the second one, right? So in this case we pronounce esta. Here we see a symbol here on top of the vowel, which is called a tilde, and it is also a diacritic symbol, which means it's put on top of the vowel. So here I will pronounce it está. I know that the emphasis goes on the last vowel. In German, we can see here the word Wort. Here we see a diacritic symbol, and that this means this needs to be pronounced Wörter. In Italian, this diacritic symbol is used, so this is pronounced più, and this is stabilità. Portuguese uses symbols even for consonants. In this case, usually the C, when it precedes a vowel like A or O or U, is pronounced K, so this is K. But in this case, the symbol here called the cedilla tells me that this needs to be pronounced like S. Also, this symbol on top of the A means that this is a different sound. So I will pronounce this as cansado. Here is você. Now my mother tongue is Spanish, so this is the one I can pronounce better. The others I pronounce as a second language speaker, and I don't pronounce it very well, but enough to be understood. And I have enough knowledge of the symbols that I can actually read these words without having to use a pronunciation guide. So what's the basic principle of the alphabet? It is to represent each sound with one symbol. The first type of script used many different symbols to represent ideas. That's why it was called an ideographic script. Here we can see Egyptian hieroglyphs, which represent ideas. This is Japanese script, where we can see symbols that also represent ideas, or at least started in this way. Next came the syllabic scripts. They started representing the sound, but they represented the sound of syllables. Well, let's say you have the word dinner, in the word dinner, you have two syllables, din and ner. In this scenario, din will be represented by one symbol and ner will be represented by a different symbol. So this was much better in terms of the number of symbols you needed to learn as compared with an ideographic. But still, you will have to learn a few hundred symbols in order to be able to read a script. Eventually, the alphabet was introduced with the idea of representing each sound with one symbol. This allowed a reader to learn only a few symbols in order to be able to read any word in the language. So here we see the symbols that were used in the Proto-Sinaitic script, which is one of the earliest phonemic scripts. So what they did is they took symbols that were already in use to represent an idea and started to represent the sound with it. This is a symbol for water, which eventually became the letter M. It helped standardize and simplify learning in the old world. So we can see the advantage of using this system. Instead of learning thousands of symbols, as in an ideographic system, or hundreds of symbols, as in a syllabic system, you only needed to learn 20 symbols, and you were able to represent any word in the language. The Phoenician alphabet was used extensively in the Old World due to their trade connections. They represented the following vocalic sounds. This was the Aleph, and is equivalent to today's A. This is equivalent to today's E in Latin. This is equivalent to today's I, and this is equivalent to today's O. Now it's interesting to see that the Phoenicians used these symbols, but it also seems to represent the position of the mouth when you utter the sound. For example, here we basically can see an angle, and if we see a person pronouncing the A, that's the position of the mouth. The mandible and the palate are in an angle. And also, the sound is not here, it's reverberating. Here, it represents three parallel lines. And when you say E, you have basically the mandible and the palate in parallel, and also the tongue. So the air is flowing in parallel. The E, it's similar in position to the E, but the tongue is actually towards the front, almost touching the lower teeth. And then the O is simpler because that's what the lips form when you're pronouncing the O. It's basically a tunnel for the air that's passing through. Now, these actual positions were represented in old books describing that those positions were used when you pronounce these vowels. The next development was the Greek alphabet, at least for the Western world. The Greek alphabet was similar, and it had the alpha, beta, gamma, delta, etc. Now, but you can see that the sound is actually in the word. So if you call this the name of the sound or the name of the letter, alpha, the A is here, B, beta is here, G, gamma, delta, etc. Now, the main difference was that the Greek were representing actually the vowels in their words, where the Phoenicians didn't represent the vowel because they had predefined vowel sounds based on a combination of consonants, which is also used today in Hebrew. Well, let's look at the Latin alphabet, which is in use in the majority of languages, at least in the Western world. The Latin alphabet was a simplification. The way you would learn the Latin alphabet would be you go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, etc. Or in today's Spanish, for example, A, B, C, D, E. So they would just go for so they would just simplify. A instead of alpha, B instead of beta, C, etc. Now the Latin alphabet follows the tradition of the Greek alphabet and the earlier alphabet, and it represents two types of letters. The vowels. The vowels are A, E, I, O, U. These are the Latin vowels. And then the consonants B, C, D, F, etc. Notice that today English is the only language that calls this A, E, I, O, U. In the rest of European languages, these are called A, E, I, O, U. A, E, I, O, U. The vowel sounds are produced by allowing the air to flow through throat and mouth, and by the simultaneous use of the vocal cords. They provide volume to words. The ancients called them the soul of words. In other words, when you are loud, you are using the vowels. You say ah. You cannot be loud by saying b, because consonants are more like noises as opposed to vowels. Why did the ancient cultures represented only 5 vocalic sounds? Well, these are high resonance. In other words, these are the loudest sounds you can produce. A, E, I, O, U. There are many other possible vocalic sounds depending on the position of the mouth. However, they are not as loud as these 5 vowels. They were represented by Phoenicians, Hebrews, Greeks, and Romans. So we see in the Latin alphabet a simple and powerful system that allows you to learn a few symbols to represent any word by using the standardized sounds represented by the letters of the alphabet. Some examples: Roma, caveat emptor, amor vincit omnia, pater noster. Now, I do not speak Latin, but I can read it. I can read it confidently that I can reproduce to a good degree the sounds of the alphabet, the sounds of the words. Now, if we look at this, and this is a very commonly used phrase today, people say caveat. And that's how everybody else would pronounce that word. There will be no doubt. Caveat emptor. To summarize, Latin alphabet was created following the concept of using one symbol to represent one sound. It was a simple and powerful system. It made it easier for people to learn to read and write at a time where resources were limited. Not even paper was easily available. An efficient communication system that allowed culture to expand in the old world. In the next video, we will see how English evolved to become an irregular language.